and the rich phenomenology of embodied experience. Across all of my work, I seek to complicate the compulsions of late capitalist society by reconsidering productivist timelines and to reframe the value of invisibility and uncertainty beyond the scope of Western binaries and homogenizing logics, foregrounding senses beyond sight. My next exhibition, Souvenirs, is a collaboration with Antoine Chenet, and it will open next week, just a few blocks down the street at LA Art Corps. Souvenirs is an exploration of memory, disappearance, and human traces on the environment, conceived during our residency at Cove Park in the Scottish Highlands. The exhibition centers a series of photographs enclosed in terrariums that function as tongue-in-cheek relics of the present, specimens for a speculative future. The images are souvenirs in both the English and French language senses. In English, a souvenir being a keepsake brought home by which to remember a far-off place, and in French, the word for a memory. Constituted of found site-specific objects and our daily detritus, the photographs are indexes of our presence at a particular place and time. Held in vitrine microcosms of the craggy Scottish coastal landscape, they are time capsules for an uncertain future, foregrounding a meditation on the medium of photography and its inherent relationship to death and disappearance, and drawing a parallel to the environment in the context of its own erosion in the Anthropocene. So Souvenirs will be on view at LA Art Corps from August 17th to September 17th, and we're having an opening reception next Friday the 18th from 6 to 9, if you're around. Back to the novel, which has a similarly speculative and ecological bent. I See More Clearly in the Dark takes place in a not-so-distant future where an intimacy, embodiment, agency, and ecological resources are being desecrated by the blinding light of hypervisibility. Its world is one in which the nooks and crannies of our bodies and environments are subject to overexposure by a state-sanctioned illumination, the better to surveil, capture, and control. To borrow language from John Miller's blurb for my book, I See More Clearly in the Dark is a, quote, parable on the tyranny of visibility set in a near sci-fi scenario of the climate crisis and unchecked real estate development managed by an authoritarian resort apparatus. Its protagonist seeks refuge in the interiority of her body, a body aligned with organic growth and decay, wild plants and animals, the ocean, and sheltering forests. Jess Arndt writes that the book is, quote, a treatise on darkness as urgent, vital recalibration for the late capitalist surveillance show and its ever-expanding suite of horrors. The novel follows a first-person narrator as she navigates a fictionalized France in which residents are being forcibly relocated into homogenous resorts built where national forests and their lush ecosystems once stood. The protagonist's lover was taken 1 year ago by this resort plan, and the narrative takes place through flashbacks as the protagonist, hiding in a hotel room on the verge of a potential escape, recalls her past year in the city of P, based on Paris, searching for meaning in her lover's absence and in a world being emptied of shadows and darkness. Darkness here is a never explicitly defined category that contains all that is unfixed, indeterminate, ungoverned, intimate, out of sight. A kind of poetic negative capability that embraces uncertainty and unknowing. Another narrator chimes in at times with whom the protagonist shares an embodied but enigmatic connection, a creaturely prehistoric or post-human body that revels in the lush, dark world of the forests until it too must come to terms with the obliterative light of the resort plan's destructive expansion. Through this work of fiction, I seek to develop an embodied aesthetics of darkness, engaging ways of seeing and feeling that resist and even refuse the surveilling forces of corporate and state neoliberalism, and questioning the ethical and aesthetic implications of a world without forests or darkness and their empowering, enveloping indeterminacy. When I started writing the novel, I was inspired by Japanese novelist Junichiro Tanazaki's essay, In Praise of Shadows, which was published in 1933. It's a free-form philosophical essay on the subject of darkness, shadow, and subtlety in Japanese and East Asian aesthetics, considering areas as diverse as architecture, no theater, crystals, jade, pottery, food, toilets, and lacquerware seen by candlelight. The text revels in the beauty that shadows can hold and that the spaces and objects that animate our daily livelihoods in turn contain within them. This homage to the dim and dusky contrasts with Western ideals of brightness, whiteness, and general brilliance. European notions of aesthetics and knowledge production have long followed the cult of light, from the Enlightenment to luminous 17th century palaces like Versailles with its glistening hall of mirrors, to the contemporary white cube, while East Asian aesthetics and architecture, Tanizaki argues, revel in the dark. I was equally inspired by other texts whose voices and influences also found their way into mine. I'm particularly indebted to the writing of French author Angareta, whose 1986 novel Sphinx was a pioneering instance of genderless and also perhaps genreless literature, written in the style of a roman policier. Like Gareta, I borrow from multiple literary genres. Noir crime, overtones, and Olympian language games give way to poetic, hybrid soliloquies. Other writers of both fiction and theory surface in my book as well. Tove Jansson, Clarice Lispector, Amina Kane, Roland Barthes, Julia Kristeva. Their language brushes up against the narrator's through intertextual juxtaposition, inflecting and rubbing off on hers, a generative contamination she experiences both intellectually and corporeally. Of traditional Japanese toilets, standing apart from the, quote, main building at the end of a corridor in a grove fragrant with leaves and moss, Tanizaki writes, quote, as I have said, there are certain prerequisites. A degree of dimness, absolute cleanliness, and a quiet so complete one can hear the hum of a mosquito. I love to listen from such a toilet to the sound of the softly falling rain, especially if it is a toilet of the Kanto region. There one can listen with such a sense of intimacy to the raindrops falling from the eaves and the trees, seeping into the earth as they wash over the base of a stone lantern and freshen the moss about the stepping stones. And the toilet is the perfect place to listen to the chirping of insects or the song of the birds, to view the moon, or to enjoy any of those poignant moments that mark the change of the seasons. Here, I suspect, is where haiku poets over the ages have come by a great many of their ideas. So on that note, on the imaginative possibilities of reflection in dark, embodied, and lushly forested places, I'll read an excerpt from the beginning of my novel, I See More Clearly in the Dark. Intertextually punctuated with lines from the Tanizaki essay, the first chapter takes place 1 year after the narrator's forced relocation by way of the resort plan, and flickers between the protagonist's and forest creatures' perspectives, the former awaiting her terrestrial escape from a hotel room in an unfamiliar city at the forest's edge. The second chapter goes back in time to 1 year earlier, the day the protagonist's lover is taken, and is interspersed with lines from Amina Kane's short story collection, Creature. So thank you so much for your patient listening, and I hope you enjoy. I'll start playing the video. Chapter 1, The Right to Opacity. The Present. The Forest and Hôtel Le Phénix, City of O. As a general matter, we find it hard to be really at home with things that shine and glitter. The Forest. The future was cold and slippery and wet. I slithered out of it like so many wanton bagpipes. It was hard to swallow. I emerged, a crumpled piece of paper, a soggy and hollow wad. I lay there on the bottom of something, flat and ovular. Reaching out, I found moist ground on all sides, damp with the persistent odor of microorganisms, feeling their way through the mush, digging into depth, putting sense before sight. I wanted to join them, to enter the dirt in a silent procession, but I was inhibited by my largeness. Clumpy chunks of flesh made up my form, which equated to a totality, an ambidextrous, prehistoric continuity. I was gelatinous enough to slide, but too solid to fall apart. My body was perched on the edge of dissolution, but refused to come undone. It was a permanent entity, at least for now. I stretched out and heard things click inside of me. I opened my eyes and found that darkness pressed in on them, even exposed to a world outside of myself, replete with air and free-falling particles, snow, skin, and soot. It was a different kind of darkness, one that had physical weight, imbued with a certainty that was impossible to dilute. It opened up a gap in me and then filled it up simultaneously. My lack grew with my desire, constantly emptying out so that it could be filled with different darkness, tactile darkness, heavy darkness that could crush me if it wanted to, but that instead just weighed me down. Agreeable, pensive, darkness with a hot, beating heart. I wonder if my readers know the color of that darkness seen by candlelight. It was different in quality from darkness on the road at night. It was a repletion, a pregnancy of tiny particles like fine ashes, each particle luminous as a rainbow. I blinked in spite of myself, as though to keep it out of my eyes. Hôtel Le Phénix. From under my eyelids, I can make out waves of daylight. I see them through the iridescent veins wedged together directly before me, lit up like pathways or residue from the trajectories of shooting stars, disappeared as quickly as they are illuminated. A small being creeps across me, ever so polite. I reach out a blind hand to pet him, and and clammy palm meets matted fur. I reach out another arm and swoop him into me despite sharp meows of protest. He wrestles to get out of my bind, but I don't let him off so easily. I squeeze him a little harder than I would squeeze a human, a great ball of darkness folded into my chest, and release him. I hear him leap from the bed and hit the ground running. I rub my eyes and then cough from the fur, sit up abruptly, and make my way to the bathroom to wash my face. The cold water feels abrasive, and when I look in the mirror, my eyes are red. Little threads of ink inscribed in their surface to signify what? Fatigue? Dryness? A chemical imbalance? I blot away the wetness with a hand towel inscribed with the hotel insignia, walk to the provided coffee machine, and fill it up with tap water. I hope the city tap water is good for drinking. I've never been here before. My cat is pawing at the glass door that leads to the balcony, but I don't let him out. They say not to let cats out in the first month of being in a new place. They need time to memorize their surroundings enough to want to come back. But in the old palace and the old house of pleasure, the ceilings were high, the skirting corridors were wide, the rooms themselves were usually tens of feet long and wide, and the darkness must always have pressed in like a fog. The forest. My body, dexterous and nimble, but achy as an aging athlete. My mind, a chilly hexagonal room with concrete walls. Without light to describe its limits, the darkness seeped in sidelong and from all directions at once, a soft core distinguishing itself from the field of opacity, bulbous and shifting. Or was it some trick of light? There was none, and I latched onto the fullness of its absence. To write a character out of the dirt, to write a character into darkness, remove her from the scrutiny of the light and allow her to put her feelers out in the damp belly of the forest without witnesses, to give her time. Without light, sensation takes precedence, something so sweet and green it could only crawl, using its body as a beacon. Her body a caterpillar, a flailing peninsula that moved without seeing, arms like sacks of potatoes that crunched into the ground. Should she be partitioned? Should she fly out in a gush of water without form? Doughy spheres of sensation that you could roll around in your mouth. How should each one go? Each sphere a theater, an entangled war, a setting of soft sounds, a field of green unbecomings, an impending disaster, a prehistoric world that lingers and cannot break. When she danced, she would dart across the room like an ultrasonic ping-pong ball. When she coughed, the tension she released was the equivalent of a global catastrophe, an earthquake that triggers a tsunami, that triggers a hurricane, that triggers a leap of faith. But here she was now, transposed in this prepubescent futurity. She was as ancient as tomorrow looked from the Jomon period of 1000 BC. The earth was a wet lump of pottery, and she was a thin cord pressed upon it, leaving imprints like incantations. She smelled slightly sweet. I called her a she in celebration of the blank state of her premonitory existence, stepping outside of her in these moments only to distance myself from the effects of geological time that had collapsed me into her. Whenever I would wriggle my way back in, I'd find her sexless and dreaming, simply an eye, a wide and restless ocean. Nestled within her sticky ontology, I breathed in something deep like ashes or soot. I wrestled myself out of the ground and began to walk, using the weight of my body and my bare feet to press myself forward from heel to toe in a repetitive motion that propelled me into a movement that looked and felt like something in between walking and swimming. As a rule, I can only be defined as a liminality, and not this, not thatness, a curious and jubilant oscillation. As I moved, I sang a song so cold and hot at once that sometimes it would catch in my throat before bellowing out. The song was a melody without language, and as it left my chest, I sensed something physical leaving with it. I squinted and could perceive its motion buzzing in the darkness. That's when I realized I was in a forest. It wasn't darting around in some empty, abysmal void, but in a three-dimensional environment composed of wood, leaves, moss, sap, and all the invisible critters that crawled between the living structures. My song split, colliding with the pines and breaking up in different directions, fragmenting and multiplying, but still somehow hovering. I began to sense the darkness as a thick cream, or maybe a soupe à l'oignon, filled to repletion with onions, cheese, and bread lumps. We never tire of the sight, for to us this pale glow and these dim shadows far surpass any ornament. Hôtel Le Phénix. The coffee is ready. I lift up the hotel mug and pour in the steaming, muddy liquid. I can feel it nourishing me almost instantaneously, as if it is wandering around my inner chambers, turning the cells on one by one. I turn to the black screen on my bedside table and pick it up. This gesture is enough to wake it from standby, its pixelized promise coming to life. The headlines pop out like little screams. Nationwide forests destroyed, replaced by glowing resorts where darkness once held silent reign. Politics of the blinding light, taxpayers' pockets drained, and resort plan with goal of total illumination. You can run, but you can't hide. Citizens flee homes in hopes of averting all-encompassing mandatory resort relocation. Where the wild things were, finding hope in a world without shadows. My favorite is light at the end of the tunnel, or is it just another resort? The media loves to repeat the obvious, as if the initial shock hasn't already worn off. I navigate my device to the location services option and make sure it is still switched to off. I am indeed off the electronic map, no longer reduced to a point, instead mercifully returned to a state of embodied unsurveillability. At times my embodiment feels like a superficial casing, a layer that could easily be peeled off to shine light into the depths of my organs. But for now I remain intact, my innards a dark, expansive field protected from the greedy rays of an ever-brightening world. I like to imagine the different parts of me, my lungs and heart in particular, swimming in this dark, impenetrable soup. They feel comfortable there in these blankets of unseeability, their wholeness irreducible to sight, safe in their cozy invisibility. Only X-rays can make their forms traceable, can transform respiration and the slow pumping of blood cells to document, image, file, hard and irrevocable knowledge. I want my organs to retain their intractability, their enigmatic fidgeting and shifting, their dissonance from the fixity of sight, if nothing more. I feel my darkness holding them inside me like a tight hug. I walk back to the bathroom with an air of relative aimlessness, phone and coffee mug still in hand. My cat is sitting beside the toilet in what I interpret as a stance of stoic defiance. If he can't have the great outdoors, well, he'll have the grandeur of the bathroom, the site of a different kind of freedom. His black fur looks unkempt despite his regal pretensions. I place the object I'm holding onto a ledge and rub my fingers into the space between his ears. I think about calling someone, but I'm afraid if I use my phone, I'll become instantly surveillable and renounce my newfound unknowability. Since leaving my apartment, I've felt pangs of loneliness, but nothing that can compete with the serenity of my regained embodiment. The hotel room is a voiceless vacuum apart from my cat's insistent meows, which I'm grateful for. They break up the days, have a transformative effect on time, which chugs forward in hearty, indivisible chunks, without the chimes of feline desire. Although I can do nothing to appease them, at least they have an enunciative function. They perform the two of us into existence, cut sonic beams through the swamp of hours. I wonder sometimes if I miss you, where you could possibly be. You don't call me, but my mom does. The vibrations send a chill through my spine, and I pray they won't give my location away. Sometimes I think it would be better if I just turned my phone off for good, but the headlines give me a sense of irrefutable certainty I cannot pass up. As I have said, there are certain prerequisites. A degree of dimness, absolute cleanliness, and quiet so complete one can hear the hum of a mosquito. I love to listen from such a toilet to the sound of the slowly falling rain, especially if it is a toilet of the Kanto region. The forest. In the dense, moist forest that had become my home, I was overcome by a sudden and violent sneeze. Restored to my senses on the other side of the sneeze, I was struck by a novelty in the environment. Trickles of light made their way between the foliage, graced the forest floor. So dim, the rays were hard to qualify as light. They were closer to premonitions. But they did contrast with the otherwise pervasive darkness in which I had until now lingered willingly. I was unfazed. I walked, swam, danced, sang, and felt otherwise vivacious and bustling. I knew I wasn't alone. The forest churned with a vigorous life lived out in secrecy, the beauty of the cool wet hushed and blistering as I trampled on, the thumps of my feet creating a rhythm that echoed off the other resonant life forms. I slipped effortlessly between the trees and branches, sticks sometimes catching in unexpected crevices in my body and creating a dull, stinging sensation. The light now brushed up against the solid surface of everything without penetrating it. I began to fixate on the dappled patterns it was making on the leaves as they called me into a hallucinatory delirium that reeked of a bitter joy with no edges, holes, or contours. I saw, sensed, intuited, imagined, dreamt, meditated on, choked on, incanted, excreted, a soft forest of planes, bodies, thoughts, coinciding in a singular moment, both dewy and charged with conflicting temporality, a gentle feast that cannot sit still and yet is motionless and wet, as if dripping, but not drowning, just dripping. Big feet push and pull, and light foregrounds everything. Bodies like butter that slides out of itself, maybe slips or sinks into your shoulder or his, blowing bubbles of sleep or smoke. Ghostly gray, now I hide and retreat from the big glistening forest, invisible face, solemn spine. I take pleasure in the abyss in which all colors densify. Darkness that cannot be peered into. Darkness without an embrace that waits. Can it pulse, or does it wait in senselessness with no movement? Can't I enter it? I don't want to believe in dead ends. Can it be porous? Say yes. It is so distant, yet somehow the only point, the only place in the chaos of the red, green, yellow forest in which I want to settle. What is at stake in being a single self whose edges are fixed but are also on the constant threshold of an inevitable dissolution? Darkness so heavy I crawl into it and seek refuge or silence. My flesh undoes itself here in this unresounding flatness. If I were to seek a surface with my hands, I would be met with a fog as thick as my fingers. Just then I caught a whiff of hot air. I recalled my tangible existence, but too late. Too late for what? My disappearance felt imminent. It was one of those things that play out in your gut, the sight of the quiet horror of irreparable knowing. The light was becoming stronger now and creating an unbearable physical sensation of heat. I forced my eyes shut, but even behind my eyelids, I was bathed in a deep red that blotted out all respite. I longed to slip back into my hallucination. I rubbed my eyes, but the darkness would not return. Everything about me was becoming visible, knowable, mappable, definable, locked into plain sight, fixed like the chemical salts of a developing bath, exposed to the light. To snatch away from us even the darkness beneath trees that stand deep in the forest is the most heartless of crimes. Hôtel Le Phénix. I lie back down in the vast hotel bed, the memory foam quickly shaping itself into a customized person-sized container that holds me together, tight. I touch my chin to my chest and watch the hills of my hips rise up behind the cloud-like protuberance of my belly, twin peaks jutting out above the atmosphere, then falling down to become hills again. There is nothing to do. I decide to write you a letter, the better to make nothing out of something. I pick up the hotel stationery and pen and begin. I write to you from the inner organs of a dark swallow. Last summer, we were sitting on a cold beach, fully clothed, eating edamame, popping the gooey peas out and throwing the pods into the sea. We talked about coming back to this forest, building a cabin out of dead logs and hoping it didn't rain. I guess somewhere in the back of our heads, we knew it might be our last chance. For what? To inhabit a shadow world, a world below the world or above. In any case, outside. A world filled to repletion with sleep, silence, memory, emptiness, desire. Desire that never revealed itself fully, that never saw the light of day, as the idiom goes. Desire that only became an object in brief fugitive flashes when its darkness was made visible, slippery, like Junichiro Tanazaki's lacquerware soup bowls. Quote, with lacquerware, there is a beauty in that moment before removing the lid and lifting the bowl to the mouth when one gazes at the still, silent liquid in the dark depths of the bowl. What lies within the darkness one cannot distinguish, but the palm senses the gentle movements of the liquid. Vapor rises from within, forming droplets on the rim, and the fragrance carried upon the vapor brings a delicate anticipation. I've been reading Tanazaki's In Praise of Shadows and finding solace in the abiding specificity of its love. He was right to think of darkness in this way, not only as a luxury that comforts as it overcomes, but as a prerequisite to existence. Now the light has gotten in everywhere. There are no cracks or crevices that have not been illuminated and dusted. Seeing myself illuminated is painful, but I can handle it. It is my own burden to bear. I cannot even imagine you in your illumination. I would hope that you are sublime, but I fear that you are not, that in the totality of your hygiene you have been swept up and away, and that the shadowless body that remains is full of bright caverns and inhospitable symmetry. Hugging you now would be like trying to hug a filing cabinet or a chandelier. I worry I would get stuck and have to walk away, maybe bleeding, maybe intact. At that moment, I just know my stomach would betray me, as it always does, an indisputable gurgle rolling out from my depths and crashing against your hard, vibrant surface. A gurgle, a crash, and a pivot marked by the squeak of a freshly washed linoleum floor. That would be my goodbye. So now you see why I have to do it here instead. My thought is that maybe language can still hold shadows inside of it. I hope you'll see the cool rationale that has brought me to this inexorable gesture, and that the hollow bodies of these words will swell out and out of their skins for you, and that they'll taste as good as my touch. Chapter 2. Heavy Shapes. The next day, Hôtel Le Phénix, city of O. The skin between me and something else is so thin. Like a creature that won't get down from the bed, words are coming to me. I've been sprawled out, breathing, for longer than I can remember. Burrowed in layers of white sheets, barely peeking out of them. I'm all out of sync. There's nowhere to go, and I keep the blinds shut. My cat is a black pile at my feet. I wiggle them around under him, and he doesn't wake up. His fur makes my toes feel alive. I keep my eyes shut and remember that myself, alone in my bed, is the story. But here I am not even alone. My cat's purr casts a vibration across my body, and the letter to you I finished writing yesterday lies quietly at the bedside table. I'm swollen with life. 2:22 p.m., Monday, December 3rd, my phone screen reads, the digits glimmering through the cracks. I put it down, press the little moon icon, do not disturb. It's almost winter outside already. The hotel balcony is coated with a thin layer of snow. I want to go out, but walking this unfamiliar city makes me feel lonely. At least here in the confines of this hotel room, I can make believe 1,000 things, and I don't have the impression I'm running out of time, as if it were an open faucet. Here I can pretend the faucet is shut and nothing can leak out. I can hear it creaking as the stream slows to a trickle, and then nothing. An empty sink, a shining cavity waiting for hands. Or maybe a bathtub, large enough for a body to sink into. Maybe I'll take one later, when I wake up. I won't wait until they find or call me, that ragged, itchy, pre-recorded phone call I'd received before my fuite from P. I know it will soon find me again in due time if I don't leave this room soon. Unplugging the hotel telephone would do no good. The only thing to do is to leave the boxes of the city behind, to set up a life at the edge of the known world where signals and sunlight do not reach. These will be my last words before I make my journey. The preparations have been taken care of. All I need to do is gather up my cat in my arms and enter the forest, where I'm awaited in secrecy. A place where my life will no longer be locked into the bright parts of language or memory. I glanced back at the letter, recognizing the future I had imagined for us. A shadow world, a world below the world, or above, in any case, outside. It was a world I would have to seek out on my own. I remember when you had gotten the phone call, the one I'm preparing to flee from again. It must have been about a year ago now. They came and picked you up in a long white limo. I saw the limo filling up from the bathroom window of our third-floor apartment in P, where I was in fact stretched out in the bath, reading Moria Davies' Long Life, Cool White. I could see the limo's smooth silhouette slow to a stop at the curb in front of our building. 2 doors opened and 2 shapeless forms got out, slammed the doors behind them. They left the engine humming, and I could swear that limo looked alive, like an animal waiting to pounce. I scrunched up my eyes where the after-image continued to pound long after the limo had driven off, with you inside of it. That blinding white, replacing everything. That day after you left, or rather, after you became gone, I felt oddly warm, like there was a little furnace rumbling somewhere within me, puffing up my body with its hot air. I kept thinking it must have been the bath. I'd been reading a short story that week with a character who loved to take baths, and I was trying it out. It said, "Taking baths has always been important for me, especially in winter. I'm more receptive then. I can feel myself going out and then coming back in." It also said, "I read books now to bring myself to a feeling." I hadn't been feeling that connected lately. The resort plan was making me feel more and more opaque. Not the me that was always in plain sight, but the dark parts. I couldn't reach into them anymore and rest in their sticky silence. What I mean is my belief had already been impounded. I had been living more or less without feeling for a while, even before they took you. I was resigned to it. Having a feeling was impractical in a reality which terminated ineluctably in relocation to one of the resorts, those shiny, homogenous structures that grew now where trees shrouded in darkness once sheltered. The rare book could still bring me there, to a feeling, but I couldn't share it with anyone. In the margin of my book, I had scribbled lines from other authors, lines whose resonant timbre I didn't want to forget, mixed in with my own thoughts like fireflies, apparitions I could only see clearly in the dark. Things like, "Clarice Lispector, I know about lots of things I've never seen, and so do you. You can't show proof of the truest thing of all. All you can do is believe." And it's the kind of belief that Julia Kristeva thinks arises through memory, sight, and love, like the image, immaterial, unprovable, but all at once concrete, billowing, and sharp. So in the end, almost sculptural, and folded, right on time. At least that's how I remember the scribbles. But I left the book back in P in my haste to flee, and the thoughts are getting further away now. And I worry that my new words do nothing but smother them like so many layers of cake. I'm getting all mixed up, finding it more and more difficult to stay in the present. It makes more sense for me to dwell in what came before, as if it's the only time I can still inhabit. From this claustrophobic hotel room here in O, I give my mind daily permission to leave this unknown city that I don't dare walk through. To return to P, return to our apartment, to the day you became gone, to those first few months of your absence that stacked into a year, when I remained in P, aimlessly seeking out the remaining darkness. I return there because I'm afraid of that, losing the feeling. 1 year earlier, the apartment, city of P. The day after you were gone, and the limo had glided away as swiftly as it had arrived, I noticed the goosebumps that had popped up all over my body. I drained the water from the bathtub, dried myself off, and pulled some clothes on. I didn't really choose, I just grabbed at random, so that when I was fully dressed, I looked like 30 people at once. I managed to find both shoes in a pair so that at least at foot level, I appeared as a cohesive identity. The rats wouldn't so much as blink. I scurried down the stairs thinking I will be able to emerge into the room as a warm person, or into the world. As I pushed open the forest green door, the cold air felt so alarmingly joyful that I thought my body might sing. Sing for what? You were gone, but I had known it was coming for a while. If not you, then me. Or more likely, both. I wondered why they hadn't checked the bathroom. I suppose they still had the decency to not open a closed door with steam brimming out from under it. Could they really have imagined it was unoccupied? That you had just left the hot water running and nothing else? I wondered also why I had stayed there, hovering in my bathwater, silent. It was a goodbye that amounted to nothing. I didn't run after you. I waited, as if my waiting could erase what had just transpired, freeze and rewind the moment of your departure. When I walk down the street, I'm never sure if I interact with others or if they interact with me. I kept moving, wriggling between the other shifting dots that animated the sidewalk. I wasn't sure where I was going, just that I needed to clear my head. It was the first time in a while I experienced the world alone. As alone as I could get, I was still speaking to you in my head. In that respect, nothing had changed. What was something docile that I could look at without it asking anything of me? I thought of the flower shop at the southern perimeter of the park. There were always those rhododendrons pushed against the humid window, bending to seed to its flatness. There I was on a walk to the flower shop. This was real. Words from the creature's story kept coming back, pressing into me, as if trying to remind me of their gentle urgency. I picked up my pace. The streets were patchily lined with pedestrians, here and there a cluster, and then no one for a few blocks. When I looked into people's eyes, they either looked back or quickly swerved their gaze. I wondered about their weather, and also at the same time wondered if they were curious about mine. My own weather felt murky, unstable. As soon as I called it one thing, cool and drizzling, for instance, it became another, placid and blue, or again, smoking. I hadn't been having enough conversations with my body lately. In fact, we hardly spoke. Maybe we weren't even on speaking terms. I wasn't sure what it was. One thing I was sure of, my body was angry. It didn't talk about it openly, but I knew. The anger was lodged so deep and had become so integral to its behavior and gestures that it was unrecognizable. It was versed in many masks. Now wild, now shy, now ravenous, now satiated, my body took on another name by the hour. Inside the flower shop. It's beautiful to be alive, to go into a floral shop in winter and look at fine plants sitting darkly in their pots. Their presence was undeniable, magnetic. To be among a crowd hurts me. Someone asked me if I needed help, but I said I was fine. I was just looking. There was a certain freedom in that. I could stand here and look. I carved myself through the plant-formed hallways of the shop. I wanted to pick up one of these heavy shapes, heave it back through the streets, and place it in the corner of my apartment by the window. It would be there every day when I woke up, giving off oxygen and generally twinkling. It felt a little cruel to house a plant knowing that I'd soon need to leave this city and our apartment if I didn't want that long limo to come back for me in due time, to disappear me according to its cunning formula. What would they do when they returned? Would they leave it there in the corner, or would they let me bring it along to my new lodgings? I knew that pets were allowed, but I had never heard anyone mention their plants. But to leave it there, a lonely life form, aching for water and care, it wouldn't last 2 weeks. I traced the edges of one of the monstera's leaves. He was thick and beautiful, almost spongy. I would have named him Robert. I thought how much better his life would be in the dim warmth of this shop, and felt that in doing nothing, I was actually taking the best course of action, making the most morally viable choice. I hoped that my non-action would reverberate through the city like an echo, tapping on people's doors in the night. They'd come to see who was there, faces all smoothed over with sleep, and pajamas sticking to their groins. Slippers on backwards, or maybe left behind, irretrievable in the dark. When they opened the door, there would be nothing but a cold wind, brittle but icy enough to pierce right through to their collarbones. They'd shudder, look left and right, and shut the door while my echoes seeped through the seams of their nightgowns. So much happens when I'm inside my mind, but I still haven't left the floral shop. I have not left the fine plants. I took in Robert with one last furtive glance and slipped out of the shop. I was aching for a new sensation. There was a bar across the street. A prominent sign read, Le Feeling, written in sloping, cursive neon set against a crimson awning. I used to come here sometimes with a group of friends, S, X, and the rest of them. We'd never stop for long, but we'd meet and from there determine our nocturnal itinerary. The colors stood out against the bright white of the snowy sidewalk, punctuated by bursts of black blobs, passers-by engulfed in scarves and coats. I crossed the street and heard a few muffled honks from behind one of my own many layers. All of it equals my life, making one ragged crawl across time. I made my way to the counter and began to strip down my hat, scarf, coat, mismatched mittens, sweater, cardigan. I was left with bare arms and a bare head and ordered a pint with grenadine syrup, a tango. The bartender's look seemed to allude to the cuteness of this choice. The drink came back looking like liquid rhodochrosite, and I took a greedy sip. The sweetness of it was slightly icky, so categorically chemical, but like the Shirley Temples of my childhood, that syrupy slipperiness stuck to my ribs as I poured it down, filling all the cavities, seeking out all the shadowy spots. I noticed an older couple to my left, sitting in a booth. All I could really make out were their eyes, which were gleaming, carnivorous, and shining at me head on. I could tell they were together solely by the proximity of those shimmering lights. They were beaming at a distance too close for friends or co-workers. I took another sip of my beer and passed my tongue across my upper teeth to taste the layer of grenadine, a rosy secretion. Two of the eyes were now beside me. They asked me if I'd like to join them at their table. I didn't have anything better to do, so I bundled up my excess layers in my arms and plopped the load down on the bench of their booth. The eyes carried my drink for me. They were crinkled, old, and gentlemanly. I thought about saying, "I want you to see what I look like when I eat," but the words weren't for their eyes. Now it's morning. Here I am on a walk to the lake. This is real. I wear headphones to clear out the feeling I had in the night and to change the lake to a softer place. I listen to music that helps me understand something about myself and about the lake. The lake, albeit artificial, was still a lake and a habitation for the park ducks as well. It was early, earlier than I was used to. Waking up in the dawn hours, drips of light just peeking in from behind drawn curtains, and finding myself as alone as I had been in the street made my body go all rigid and limp, paralyzed in an immobile weakness in which my muscles seemed to transmute into crepuscular drool. I attempted to drift off again, but my solitude kept reverberating in the room, bouncing off the walls and slapping me on my face. I lay there a long while, imagining the shape you had taken, saw you in that empty palace where some glorious forest had once stood, obliterated by the light. My wanting had no edges or corners and also no object. You weren't the soft pool of flesh I knew you as. Now you were a hollow absence in our bed. Your pillow looked awkward, all puff and no indent, no weight. I had stumbled home the night before with my clothes blowing all around me in the midnight wind. I think I had been accompanied by two pairs of glistening eyes, but after pressing in the digicode to my front door and offering a wide, ambiguous smile, I brusquely let myself in, opening the door only enough to let my own cloaked body sneak through and shut it firmly behind me. Now I was beside the lake, watching little waves float up with the wind, someone singing sweetly in my ear to heavy bass and synthesizers. I kept my legs moving, and they looked sprightly, like two galloping fawns. I listened to them and to the sounds coming through my headphones and thought I understood something about the lake, its placid green gloom, its containment, its sedentary nature, but what I understood about myself had been wiped clean. I was a blank slate ambling on childlike hooves, a feathered, limpid creature sauntering beside the murk. From above, I could have been mistaken for a duck escapee, sneaking off for a trial run on alien land. Then I will fall asleep in my bed like the waves. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for your patient listening. You're such a good audience.